Most cons take time to build. They need weeks, sometimes months, of groundwork. Trust earned slowly, affection manufactured carefully, the target warmed up like a room before a fire is lit. But some people don't work that way. Some people have learned to move fast, to read a man in the first 10 minutes, to know exactly how much time they have and exactly how much they can take before the window closes. Jade Santos took £375,000 from Norbert Collins in 90 days. 90 days, faster than most people plan a holiday. This is what speed looks like when it wears the face of love. The wire confirmation came through on a Tuesday morning. I remember staring at it on my phone in the back of a taxi, the streets of Manila blurring past the window, and feeling something I could only describe as relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. Because Jade had needed that money urgently. She had been worried for 3 days, genuinely frightened, and now I had fixed it. Now she could breathe. Now we could get back to being what we had been for the past 2 months, which was the best thing in my life. That was day 74. By day 90, she was gone. By the time I understood what had happened, I had transferred £375,000 to a woman I had known for less than 3 months. A woman whose last name I had not verified. A coordinator from Manila with a warm voice, and a gift for reading exactly what a lonely 69-year-old man needed to hear. Let me tell you how 90 days can hollow a man out. I came to Manila in the 3rd week of January 2024. Not my first time in Asia. I had done business across the region for much of my career, building a small but profitable import consultancy that I ran out of London for 26 years, before selling it in 2021. I understood the geography, I had a feel for the pace of things, and I did not consider myself the sort of man who gets rattled by unfamiliar places or unfamiliar people. That confidence, as it turned out, was part of the problem. I was 69 years old, recently divorced after a marriage of 22 years that had been failing for the last 8 of them. My ex-wife Helen and I had separated formally in 2022, and the divorce was finalized in early 2023. We had 2 grown sons, Marcus, who lived in Edinburgh and worked in finance, and Paul, who was in Bristol doing something in renewable energy that I never fully understood, but was proud of regardless. The divorce was not bitter, it was just done. We had stayed together too long out of habit and mutual respect for the structure we had built, and when it finally ended, there was grief but no real surprise. I had moved into a flat in Kensington, sold the family home, and started the process of figuring out what 69 and single and retired looked like. The answer, for a while, was very quiet. I had money. The business sale in 2021 had been clean and well-timed, and combined with the proceeds from the house, I had assets of just over £900,000 in liquid savings. I had a modest pension on top of that. I was not rich by London standards, but I was comfortable, and comfortable at 69, after a working life as disciplined as mine, felt like something I had earned. What I had not earned, or at least had not figured out how to use, was the time. I had always been a man defined by work. The consultancy had required everything: sourcing, shipping logistics, supplier relationships, regulatory compliance across multiple jurisdictions. I had been busy every day for 26 years, and then suddenly I was not busy, and the flat in Kensington was very quiet, and Marcus called once a week with the kind of careful, dutiful warmth that good sons produce when they're worried about a parent, but don't know how to say so. I went to Manila because a former business contact, a man named Robert Chu, who had been my logistics partner in the Philippines for years, had retired there himself, and had been telling me for 2 years that I ought to come. Robert was 64, remarried to a Filipino woman, genuinely content in a way that read as earned rather than performed. I trusted his judgment, and I needed somewhere to go. I arrived on the 21st of January. Robert met me at the hotel and took me to dinner that first night. A restaurant in BGC, good food, cold beer, the city visible through the windows in all its loud and layered complexity. Robert's wife, Cora, joined us halfway through the meal. She was warm and easy. and ask good questions. I left the dinner feeling more settled than I had in months. I met Jade Santos on the 26th of January, 5 days after landing. Robert had organized a small gathering at his apartment. 8 people, mostly professionals and expats he knew through various channels. Jade was there because she worked as an events coordinator for a hotel group and had handled an event Robert's wife had attended. She knew Cora casually, not Robert directly. She was 34 years old. That is the first thing I should tell you honestly, because the age gap matters, and I knew it mattered, and I chose to interpret it as irrelevant. She was 34, and I was 69, and the gap between us was 35 years. And I told myself that such things matter less when you are at the stage of life I was at, when you are looking for companionship rather than a future, when you are simply trying to feel less alone. She had energy that filled the room without being loud. She moved through conversations easily, listened with her whole face, made the person she was talking to feel like the most interesting person present. When she turned that attention toward me, I felt it physically, a warmth, a focus, like a lamp being aimed in your direction. We talked for most of the evening. She asked about the consultancy, about London, about what had brought me to Manila. She talked about her work, coordinating large-scale corporate events, managing vendors and timelines, and the particular chaos of keeping multiple moving parts aligned. She made it sound complex and demanding, which it probably was. "Do you like it?" I asked. "The work. I'm good at it," she said. "That's not quite the same thing, is it?" I laughed at that. It was the right answer. Honest, without being self-pitying. I filed it as evidence of a particular kind of intelligence. She asked for nothing that evening. She did not push for my contact details. At the end of the night, I asked for her number, and she gave it without hesitation, and then she left with a small group of others, and said she hoped she'd see me again. I messaged her the following morning. That was day 1. By day 7, we had met for coffee twice, and dinner once. She was punctual, neatly dressed, professional in her bearing. Nothing about her presentation screamed urgency or need. She asked good questions about my life, and offered honest answers about hers. She lived in Ermita, shared a flat with a flatmate she described as a nurse who worked night shifts, had grown up in Cavite, and had been in Manila for 8 years building her career. The story was specific and consistent. It had the texture of a real life. On day 10, she mentioned, briefly and without drama, that she was going through a difficult period with her landlord. The building management had increased rent significantly, and her flatmate had given notice because she'd found something closer to her hospital. She was looking for a new flat, but the deposits in Manila were steep, and she'd had an unexpected expense, a family member in the province, medical bills. She did not ask me for anything. I offered. "How much is the deposit?" I asked. She shook her head. "I wasn't asking, Norbert. I know you weren't," I said. "I'm asking you." She told me. 30,000 pesos, roughly 430 pounds. I transferred it that afternoon. She was embarrassed and grateful, and told me 3 times it was a loan, that she would pay it back, that she hated accepting help. That was the template. And I did not recognize it as a template because it did not feel like one. By day 20, I had given her 1,800 pounds across 3 small transfers, the flat deposit, a contribution toward the first month's rent, and 700 pounds for what she described as an urgent gap in her salary payment, her employer's payroll having been delayed by a bank processing issue. Each time, she offered to pay it back. Each time, the offer felt genuine enough that I told her not to worry about it. Each time, I felt good about having helped. What I did not see was the pace, the frequency, the fact that in 20 days, 3 separate financial situations had required my assistance. I was enjoying myself too much to count. By day 30, I was in something I would have called, if pressed, a relationship. We were spending 4 or 5 evenings a week together. She had met Robert and Cora at a second gathering, and conducted herself warmly and naturally with them. Robert pulled me aside afterward, and said she seemed nice. Cora was quieter on the subject, which I noticed, and then set aside. The affection between Jade and me was real on my side. Whether it was real on hers, is a question I stopped being able to answer once the 90 days were up. At the time, it felt real. She was attentive in the way that people are when they are genuinely fond of you. Small things, noticing when I was tired, remembering details I had mentioned weeks earlier, a specific kind of presence when we were together that made me feel seen in a way I had not felt in years. Helen and I had stopped seeing each other properly long before the marriage ended. You forget what it feels like to have someone's full attention. When you get it again, at 69, you hold on to it. Day 35 was the first large ask. We were at dinner. Jade was quieter than usual. I asked what was wrong. Something at work, she said. I shouldn't bring it to you. It's not your problem. Tell me, I said. She described a situation where a major corporate event she had been coordinating, a 2-day conference for a Singapore-based firm, a contract worth significant commission to her, was at risk because the hotel's A vendor had pulled out. The replacement vendor required a deposit up front before confirming the booking, and the hotel was taking too long to process the internal purchase order. If she missed the window to secure the vendor, she would lose the contract, and with it, the commission, and with it, her quarterly bonus that she had been counting on. How much is the deposit? I asked. She named a figure, £4,500, which she framed in pesos. And if the hotel processes their purchase order in time, then I won't need it, she said. But it's a big if. Their admin is slow. They have never moved fast on anything. I sent the £4,500 the following morning. She confirmed receipt, said the vendor was secured, said she would have it back to me within 2 weeks when the hotel's internal payment came through. 2 weeks later, she said the hotel's finance department had delayed the reimbursement. She was chasing it. She was mortified. She transferred £800 toward it, which I had not asked for, and said the rest was coming. The £800 felt like evidence of good faith. It cost her something, which meant she wasn't simply taking without consideration. That was how I read it. I was miscounting entirely. I was treating individual transactions as isolated events rather than reading the cumulative pattern. In my business career, I had always been able to see a pattern in financial data. What I could not do, apparently, was see a pattern in financial data when I was emotionally involved with the person generating it. Day 48. Her younger sister in the province, a woman named Rosalinda, whom Jade mentioned occasionally, had been in an accident, motorbike. Not life-threatening, but a broken leg and significant hospital costs not covered by any insurance because Rosalinda worked in formal jobs and had no coverage. Their mother was elderly and could not manage it alone. Jade told me on a video call. She was composed but clearly stressed, the kind of stress that shows in the jaw, in the brevity of sentences. She said she was going to Cavite for 2 days to help sort things out. She said she had already started calculating what she could move from her savings. I asked how much was needed. She said she didn't want to involve me in her family's problems. I told her it was not a problem. She gave me a figure, £8,200, which she broke down precisely. Hospital bill, medication, physiotherapy deposit, travel costs. The precision of it struck me as credible. Vague requests feel suspicious. Itemized ones feel like accounting. I transferred £8,200 on day 49. Jade went to Cavite for 3 days. She sent me photographs, her mother's house, a hospital corridor, a plate of food. The photographs felt like evidence of a real trip to a real place for a real reason. I did not consider that photographs can be sourced from anywhere. By day 60, the total was approximately £23,000. I had not kept a running total. That was the critical failure. I kept my business accounts with precision and discipline, but I had not extended that same discipline to what I was spending in my personal life, because the personal life was where I had decided to stop being a businessman and start being a man. That decision cost me everything that followed. Day 63 was the day the scale shifted. Jade came to me with something she called a professional opportunity. A colleague at the hotel group, a senior coordinator named Marco, whom she had mentioned twice before, was leaving to start his own events management company. He had secured a contract with a large pharmaceutical firm for a regional conference series worth significant ongoing revenue. He had asked Jade to come in as a co-director, handling client relations and logistics while he managed business development. The opportunity required her to buy into the venture as a founding partner. The amount was £28,000. She walked me through the business plan, which she had printed and brought to dinner. It had the right format: projected revenue, cost structure, client pipeline. She talked about it with the specific excitement of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of break. "Do you have the capital?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not all of it. I have some savings, but not enough. And the window is closing. Marco needs confirmation by the end of the week, because the pharmaceutical client needs to finalize the vendor list." I looked at the business plan. I looked at her face. "I'll cover it," I said. She hesitated. A specific, timed hesitation that I interpreted as reluctance, and that I now understand may have been calibration. "This is different from the other times. Norbert," she said. "This is a lot of money. I don't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated," I said. "I feel like this is a good opportunity, and I'm in a position to help, that's all." I transferred £28,000 on day 64. After that, the requests accelerated in both size and frequency. Not dramatically, not in a way that set off a single clear alarm, but in retrospect, looking at the calendar, the pace increased meaningfully from day 64 onward. Day 68, £12,000 toward what she described as a licensing requirement for the new venture, a regulatory registration fee and legal costs for establishing the company. Day 71, £9,500 for what she said was a deposit on an office space that Marco had found in Makati, required upfront to secure the lease before another tenant took it. Day 74, £31,000. This was the wire confirmation I stared at in the taxi. She had described this as the first operating capital injection. The new company needed working funds before the pharmaceutical contract began generating invoices. She had been stressed for 3 days, genuinely frightened, she said, that the opportunity was going to collapse before it launched. By day 74, the total was somewhere above £110,000. I had not calculated the exact figure. I was deliberately not calculating it, I think, in the same way that a person sometimes avoids looking at a number they sense might stop them from doing something they want to do. The call from Marcus came on day 77. My son Marcus, in Edinburgh. He called at an unusual time, a Wednesday afternoon, not our regular Sunday check-in. I answered, and immediately I could hear something careful in his voice. "Dad," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Go ahead," I said. "How much money have you transferred to this woman?" I was quiet for a moment. "How do you know about that?" "Because I spoke to Robert Chu," he said. "He called me Dad. He said he was worried about you and didn't know how else to raise it." Robert. I had not expected that. We had barely discussed Jade in recent weeks. I had been less available for Robert's dinners, more absorbed in my time with her. "What did Robert say?" I asked. "He said she's been seen around several expat circles before, that someone he knows recognized her from a social gathering 2 years ago, that there were questions then about money." I said nothing. "Dad, how much?" I told him. I wasn't sure of the exact total. He was quiet in the particular way that children are quiet when they are controlling their reaction out of love. "I need you to add it up," he said, "before you speak to her again. Just add it up and look at the number." I told him I would. I sat with my bank records that evening, for the first time since arriving in Manila. I went through every transfer I had made to Jade Santos since day 10. I used my phone's calculator, and I added up every figure. The number was £118,400. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I thought, the business venture is real. Marco is real. The pharmaceutical contract is real. The money is working towards something. This is not charity. This is investment. When the company launches and the revenue begins, she will be in a position to return everything I have given her. This is temporary. This is what you do when you believe in someone. I called her. "I've been doing some accounting," I said. Oh? Her voice was light. I've put in quite a lot, Jade. More than I realized. I know, she said. I think about it. I hate that you've had to carry so much of this. Once the company is operational, I'm going to... It's over £100,000, I said. A pause. Short. I know, she said again, more quietly. I need to understand, I said, exactly where we are with the venture. What's operational? What's registered? What can I see? She said she would arrange for me to meet Marco. She said she would show me the registration documents and the office space and the client contract. She said she wanted me to feel completely secure about everything. I said that would be good. The meeting with Marco never happened. She called the following day to say Marco had taken a sudden trip to Cebu for a family matter. Could we reschedule for next week? I said yes. Next week, she said Marco was in meetings with the pharmaceutical client, and it was a sensitive period to interrupt. Could we give it a few more days? I gave it a few more days. On day 82, she came to me with another request. This one was different in character. She said the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission had imposed an unexpected compliance requirement on new companies registering in their sector, an additional bond deposit of £35,000 that had to be paid within 7 days or the registration would lapse. If the registration lapses, she said, we lose the pharmaceutical contract. Marco has already put in his own savings. He needs my portion to complete the bond. I did not say yes immediately. Something had shifted in me since the call with Marcus. A quietness, a distance. I need to see the SEC notice, I said, the official document. She sent me something that evening, a PDF with an official-looking header. I looked at it. I am not a Philippine regulatory lawyer. I did not know what an authentic SEC compliance notice was supposed to look like. What I knew was that I was being shown a document I could not verify by a woman I had given £118,000 to in less than 3 months, and that the meeting with Marco had now been postponed 3 times. I called Robert Chu that night. I told him what Marcus had told me, that someone in his circle had recognized Jade from 2 years earlier. I asked him what he knew. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I didn't want to say anything without being sure. The person who mentioned it, an American expat named Frank Gillespie, he said a woman matching her description had been involved in something similar with a man he knew in 2022. Different name. He wasn't certain it was the same person. Different name, I said. Yes, Robert said. I sat with that. Robert, I said, have you ever actually met Marco? A pause. No, he said. You've mentioned him, but no. Has anyone else? I didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. I did not transfer the £35,000. I messaged Jade to tell her I needed more time before I could make any further transfers. I kept the message brief. I said I was reviewing my finances and needed a clearer picture before committing more funds. She called within an hour. Norbert, the deadline is in 7 days. If we miss this window. I understand that, I said. I need a few days. A few days is the same as saying no, she said. You know that. Her voice was different. The warmth was still there, but it had a sharper edge now, something underneath that had not been audible before. Then maybe it's saying no, I said. She was quiet. Has someone been speaking to you? She asked. No one has put ideas in my head, I said. I've been counting. Counting what? Everything I've given you, I said. And thinking about the fact that I've never met Marco. A long silence. I'll arrange the meeting, she said. This week. I'll make it happen. Okay, I said. When? Thursday, she said. Thursday evening. Thursday came. She texted mid-afternoon to say Marco had been called back to the pharmaceutical client. A last-minute presentation. Unavoidable. She was so sorry. I did not respond to that message. I messaged her the following morning. Jade, I wrote. I've added up everything I've transferred to you since we met. It's £118,400. I am not going to transfer any more money. I'd like to meet and talk, if you're willing. She read it. I could see the read receipt. She did not reply. I waited 24 hours. No reply. I called. It went to voicemail. I left a message, calm, direct, no accusations. Just, I would like to talk, please call me. No callback. On day 90, I sent one final message. I told her I understood what had happened. I told her I was not going to involve the police or make this complicated for her, which was probably a decision I should revisit, but it was what I said in that moment. I told her I just wanted to know one thing. Was any of it real? She read that message too. She never answered it. I sat in the hotel room I had moved back to. I had been staying in Jade's area most nights but had checked back into proper accommodation after the Thursday meeting fell through, and I looked at the ceiling for a while. Then I called Marcus. She's gone, I said. He didn't say anything right away. I could hear him exhale. How much? He said. 118,000, I said. Another silence. Dad, he said. I'm booking a flight. You don't have to do that, I said. I know I don't have to, he said. Marcus arrived 2 days later. He did not manage to keep his composure entirely when he first saw me. He held it together, but I could see the effort it took. We sat in the hotel restaurant, and I walked him through all of it. The pace of it. The structure of the asks. The business venture that had never produced a single verifiable document. The man named Marco, who had never been in the same room as me. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, the meeting, the pharmaceutical client, Marco, the SEC notice, Dad, none of it was ever going to be real. It was designed to buy time and extract as much as possible before you ran the numbers. I know, I said. 90 days, he said. She did this in 90 days. Less, I said. She was past 100,000 by day 74. He shook his head. Not at me, at the situation, at the efficiency of it. We went to the British Embassy the following week. An officer there was helpful and clear with us. International financial fraud cases of this type are difficult to prosecute in the Philippines, especially when the transfers were voluntary and there is no paper trail of explicit false promises. Only a verbal business venture that cannot be disproved because it never existed formally enough to disprove. He advised engaging a local attorney, which we did, a woman named Attorney Sandra Obusan, who specialized in financial crime and was honest with us from the first meeting about the difficulty of recovery. The transfers were made willingly, she said. There was no forgery, no false contract in your name. What there was is a pattern of deception, but proving criminal intent in this context is a process, and recovery of funds is a separate question from prosecution. She advised us to file a report, which we did. Whether it produced any outcome, I cannot tell you. Marcus handled most of that process. I watched it happen and felt the particular helplessness of being the person something had happened to, rather than the person managing the response. Robert Chu came to see me before I flew home. He sat across from me at the same restaurant where we had had dinner on my first night in Manila. He looked older than he had 4 months ago, which I suspected I did too. Frank Gillespie told me more, he said. After Marcus called me, the man she was involved with in 2022, his name was never collected properly. He left Manila, and nobody followed up. It happens more than people admit. She used a different name then, I said. Presumably, a different story. Presumably, Robert said. She was quick, I said. That's the thing. Everyone talks about these situations as if they unfold slowly. This was fast. She read me in the first 10 minutes, and she knew exactly what she was working with. What do you mean? Robert said. She knew I was recently divorced. She knew I was lonely. She knew I had run a business, so I would respond to professional framing. Business ventures, investment language, structured requests rather than emotional ones. She calibrated the whole thing to who I was. The family emergencies for the early amounts, when I needed something human. The business venture for the larger amounts, when she needed to speak to the part of me that understood capital and returns. Robert was quiet. I've been doing business across Asia for 25 years, I said. I could read a supply chain, read a partner, read a contract. I could not read this. Different kind of reading, Robert said. Yes, I said. Different kind. I flew back to London on a Thursday in late April. Marcus drove me from Heathrow. Paul came down from Bristol that weekend. We had dinner at my flat, and nobody brought it up directly. They talked around it, the way families do when they're protecting someone from having to perform their own wound, and I was grateful for that. I am 69 years old. I lost 118,400 pounds in 90 days. That is real and permanent. I will not recover the money. I will not recover the months. I accept both. What I have spent more time thinking about, since returning, is not the money. It's the question I asked in that final message, the one she read and never answered. Was any of it real? I've come to a position on that. Not a comfortable one, but an honest one. No. I do not think any of it was real in the sense I meant when I asked. I think she was operating from the beginning with a specific intention, and that intention made everything else a performance. The attention, the warmth, the specific way she asked questions and remembered answers, all of it was in service of something else. But here is the harder thing. The performance was built from something real about me. She saw something genuine. My loneliness, my willingness to be generous, my tendency to respond to professional framing, my desire to feel useful to someone who mattered to me. She used real things about me to build a false thing around me. And the real things remain real, even now that I know what was done with them. I am lonely. I was lonely before Manila, and I am lonely now. That did not go away with the money. What went away was the particular kind of optimism that lets you walk into a room and believe that what feels good is what is good. I was a man who had spent a decade in a marriage that had quietly stopped working, and I had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely wanted, and when I thought I felt it again, I stopped counting. That is the thing she exploited. Not my stupidity, not my naivety in any simple sense. She exploited the specific hunger of a man who had been emotionally cold for a long time and suddenly felt warm again. Marcus calls every other day now. Paul visits more than he used to. They are not different people. They are the same sons they have always been. But I think the distance of my years in the marriage, and then the year since the divorce, and then the months in Manila, have changed something in how I receive what they offer. I am better at it now. Less defended, less inclined to keep things at a business-like arm's length. That is a change I did not expect to come from this. The flat in Kensington is still quiet, but I have started to accept the quiet differently, not as something to escape, but as a space I am learning to occupy honestly. I have taken on a mentoring role with a young entrepreneur through a program a friend suggested. I have had dinner with Robert, back in London, on a visit in July. I have, slowly and imperfectly, started to build the shape of a life that does not require something from the outside to feel bearable. I have not gone back to Manila. I don't know if I will. I don't hold the city responsible for what happened in it. That would be too easy. What happened was between a woman who was very good at her work and a man who forgot to do his. 90 days. Less than a season. Enough time to plant something, tend it, harvest it, and leave before the frost comes. She was efficient, I'll give her that, and I was willing, in a way I had not been willing in years, to believe that what was being offered freely. That willingness was not stupidity, it was hope. And hope, I've decided, is not something to be ashamed of, even now, even after. I am more careful with it now, is all.